Welcome, everyone, to the Goddess Vibration Podcast. This is Allie.
And this is Tiarra.
Today, we have a very special guest. Her name is Sara Illig, and she is a very skilled EFT practitioner. She is also a massage therapist. She has been doing this for over 20 years. Sara is a very passionate woman. She is all about helping the collective and healing. And I love that she does EFT. She's actually the one who introduced me to EFT. And we are so excited to have her here and have the discussion about what EFT is and the history behind it, some of the psychology behind it, and how she uses it to help people transform. And again, we're so excited and welcome, Sara.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here.
It's my honor.
So, Sara, let's start with the history of EFT before we go into or actually, kind of a combination of what is EFT, how did you get into it, and a little bit of the history. Let's start there.
Okay, what is EFT? Well, EFT is a combination of talk therapy and needleless acupuncture. But instead of using needles, you're using your finger to stimulate percussion on certain points, using the same channels that an acupuncturist would use to rebalance your system. And those channels run from head to toe on your body. And what happens when you do EFT is that since a lot of trauma and a lot of emotions are nonverbal or pre-verbal, you're using the rhythmic percussion to soothe and communicate with the hindbrain and the midbrain that aren't wired for language. And so the rhythmic percussion of the tapping kind of comes in and soothes and communicates with those parts of the brain. Those are wired for survival, for fight and for flight and freeze and for regulation and things like that. And so they're not wired for language. And so the midbrain's not wired for language, but the forebrain is wired for language. So we use the talk therapy part of everything to come in and stimulate the forebrain. We use logic and reason and behavioral therapy for the forebrain while we're using the percussion for the other parts of the brain. So simply put, it rebalances your energy system. It helps drop your cortisol levels. It releases beneficial hormones. It will help drop your blood pressure. And it reduces your stress levels dramatically.
You know, I had no idea that EFT was capable of all that, despite having done this with you a few times.
Yeah, it really affects a lot of systems in your body simultaneously, and that's why it's so useful. Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. And
Mm-hmm.
how did you get into this?
Well, I discovered EFT in about 2005. I was driving down the road with my sister, and we were talking about some sort of possibility in the future. And I was really riding a place of fear. And I was stuck in a big pile of what I call what ifs. And we were talking about this thing in the future, and I was saying, "What if this? And what if that? And what if this?" And my sister just stopped me and she said, "What if?" And she had just come across this technique recently herself, and she took my hand, my free hand, while I was driving, and she started me tapping on top of my head. And she had me repeating some phrases after her while I was driving. And by the time we got home, I was calm, cool, and collected. I was no longer insecure about the future. And I was very curious about what this tool was that had worked on me where so many other tools in the past have failed. So that's kind of how I got my start with EFT. It was just driving down the street one day, um, full of fear, trying to rebalance myself.
I probably wouldn't recommend that you do this while driving.
Right. I was like, wait,
It's
what?
good
What
for
happened?
stoplights. It's good for stoplights. I have pulled up next to people and seen them tapping on themselves at the stoplight. Those little incidences of, we all have those little places of road rage and things like that where somebody just, hacks us off when we're driving down the street. And so there's those moments where we can stop on the side of the road and take a little, time out to tap for a second. But yeah, you're right. I wouldn't recommend just free tapping, free tapping on yourself while you're driving down the street. Um, but that is how I got my start.
So, Sarah, you said something really interesting earlier about EFT and that it sounds like it works at the subconscious level. And, we as complex beings, sort of the mind, body, spirit kind of all interconnect. So that's why you often see changes that are emotional, but also physical and also mental, which I think is actually really amazing. Can you clarify? So EFT stands for emotional freedom. Is it emotional freedom
Hmm.
tapping?
It is.
Oh, okay. I just wanted
It
to clarify
is.
that for the audience. Okay.
It is. And it sounds like a little bit what you're referring to as a cognitive shift that that occurs that occurs when you also get an energetic shift in your body.
Yeah.
You also get a cognitive shift in your body, and they do
Ah.
kind of happen simultaneously. That aha comes with a relief. You kind of get the sigh and the aha at the same moment, and there's a real sense of freedom there.
So that's when you start to see like the bodily reactions, sigh, but also like yawning or coughing or laughing or crying.
You might actually start getting those really right prior to the aha.
Oh, interesting.
I like to, I kind of jokingly say it's like Willy Wonka's factory up in here, where they get caught in the room where they have to belch themselves free,
Oh,
where they're
yes.
floating at the top of the ceiling and they have to burp their ways down. And I call it cellular off-gassing. And people will itch and they'll tingle and they'll belch and they'll fart. Pardon me.
Wow.
But all sorts of ways um, besides just regular crying, teeth chattering, other emotional signals. But you might have any sort of physical sensation happening when you're doing EFT. You might have no physical sensation happening when you do EFT. You might only have a cognitive shift,
Hmm.
but there are physical sensations that can occur. A warm, tingly sensation, a temperature shift in your body might also occur. You might feel warm a warm sensation come over you or something like that.
That is so interesting. And it goes to show how integrated those different aspects of the self are, and how the emotional is and the mental and the physical are all interconnected and work together. And I think we forget that a lot when it comes to some of this healing work. Like, we focus on maybe just the mental, or we focus on maybe just emotional, without realizing it's all like interconnected together. And when you have shifts in other areas, you're going to see it physically, or you might have physical shifts. And then you also might see some cognitive or mental or emotional shifts. And so I'm glad that we're talking about that today.
Yeah, well, that's another reason that EFT is such a handy tool is because we ask you to come back in and tune into your body and
Yeah.
ask where you feel it in your body because your body really is a map of where you're storing your memories. And that's why you feel, yeah, those physical sensations come up. Um, I I I had a guy whose knee activated once in one of my circles. His knee activated once, and he got up out of circle and called me a witch and went running out of my
Oh,
house. And because his knee started tingling, his knee started
wow.
tingling, but he wasn't prepared for a physical sensation that came with EFT.
Yeah.
And so yeah, just any memory that's trapped in your body somewhere, you might have a sensation that comes up with that. So don't be scared of that and don't be unprepared for that, and welcome it because it's not going to last forever. This too shall pass,
Yeah.
you know.
That is really interesting. I knew that we stored memory in places, but I didn't realize that it could be anywhere in the body. Normally, like where I store a lot of mine when I've done EFT, a lot of it is like in my stomach area or like in my shoulders, but like so these memories could be stored even in the feet, your toes, your fingers, just anywhere in the body.
Okay, so in the healing world, um, oftentimes pain will shift from one place to another before it dissipates. And in the healing world, we call it chasing pain. And it will move from one place to another, and it will often move center and then up and out before it dissipates. So it can absolutely be stored anywhere, and you might touch somebody's toe or foot or knee and have them have a memory of some abuse that happened in their childhood come up, and it's a trigger for them. So yeah, it's a real thing, chasing pain in the body.
Sorry, I just actually had a different question. That's something that came up because you had mentioned childhood. Does EFT also work when working with like generational trauma or like past life regression and past life trauma?
Some of my favorite stuff to work with is that generational trauma and past life stuff. I've had all of the above come up during session, and I've had medium work come up in session. I've had people
Wow.
try to who haven't been able to cross over, who have attached
What?
themselves to other people that need help crossing over, come up and get help crossing over through EFT. So there's all sorts of ways that you can use that technique. It's an energy medicine technique, and it's a way of accessing um, very intricate ways of, of the energy field.
That's
It's a
incredible.
quantum medicine technique.
I did not realize that it
So,
could go into
yeah.
the past life work. I never realized that.
Well, sure, we're living our past lives
Right.
out in real time if we don't get it. So, in that capacity, how could it not be doing past life work,
Right, because past, present, and future are all
right?
happening now. So essentially what you're doing is,
Yeah,
yeah,
we're all weaving into the same tapestry. And so it just depends on which thread you're pulling on. So to answer your question in a different way,
Okay.
it depends on which practitioner you're working with, Allie, right? Does your practitioner know that they can do past life work with EFT, or are they just only tapping on their foot pain?
Just I so Sarah is my EFT practitioner, just for our audience to know. And yeah, I didn't realize that it was so complex and it goes that deep, but it's also like that's really cool. That's really cool.
that is.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, and that's why I've been doing it for so many years because there's really not a direction that you can't
And
go with it.
I don't think people know that. I don't think I mean, I haven't met very many people who even know what EFT is, like just in the general public, but this is why like we love finding very uniquely skilled people because there's so many different ways to heal and really like it's important when if we really want to transform to do the deeper healing work and those practitioners are harder to find so I love the work that you do. I think you're amazing. I recommend Sarah to anyone. And yeah, this is just, I'm learning a lot.
I am too. Yeah. So, Sarah, it sounds like this could be a great avenue for someone who is particularly interested in like not just traumas, but like the shadows connected to the traumas, like some of that shadow work, because we have been talking a lot about shadow work on this podcast. So it sounds like this could be a good avenue to even identify what some
Hmm.
of those shadows are, correct?
Oh, I work in opposites all the time. So, yeah, that's what EFT is for, right? It's to pull out the deep, dark, ooey gooey stuff and to take a look at it and to dance with that and to not shame it and to really understand its purpose and its gifts and its reason for existing and its reason for showing up in the first place. And then also to hand yourself possibilities of, gosh, what would I also like instead of just my shadow? Can I also have another possibility of somebody else to dance with, please? And so you offer yourself other possibilities as well. Um, and so, yeah, you do your shadow work with EFT. That's what it's there for. And then also you're accessing an infinite field of possibilities for the future that we often forget is there, right? We just forget that we often land on this one or two things that we think is reality and we have set in front of us as this is the way it is. And um, we don't stop to realize it's like, wait, I'm sitting here in a field of infinite possibilities. And what's got me tricked over here is this shadow guy. But yeah, that shadow guy has a gift and a lesson and a reason and all of that stuff that I'm supposed to be listening to and learning from.
It absolutely is important. And, we've been exploring shadow work and we have, even started some discussion boards on like Reddit about shadow work. And so many people are like, they hear the word and they immediately put like this negative spin on shadow work, like it's evil, or you're not supposed to touch it, or you're not supposed to go there, or people are afraid and they run from it. And I'm just trying to kind of figure out why. Is it just lack of education? Is it just, it's obviously not the most enlightening experience to work through your shadows, but there's this fear just surrounded by shadow work. And we're it kind of stumps Tiara and I. We're just kind of like, why?
I mean,
I always say you can't clean the house if you can't see the dirt. And so you need to look for the dirt. You need to
so Sarah, when people come to see you, like, do they understand in advance, hey, this could end up showing me to my shadows? Like, do they understand that, or do they often get surprised when you're
No, hence the
no.
guy who called her a witch and went running out of her house.
That's just crazy to me. Oh,
Once they
wow.
hear my cackle, it's even
So
worse.
that's okay. That confuses me then, because what do people expect going into this type of work? Are they just expecting like the love and light approach, where it's just like, it's fluffy and butterflies and rainbows, and they're gonna magically be healed?
I don't know. I know, right? I don't know what the heck they expect. Like, like a lot of people walk through my door and I ask them what they're
Oh,
expecting, and they're like, "Oh." And some people have so one thing that you can do to spread the word about EFT is call it EFT tapping, because people have heard of tapping and or EFT tapping. Tapping got a little bit more of a buzzword than EFT did. And so people are familiar and they can picture what tapping might be. And so they might have heard what a thing called tapping is, and they can picture what tapping might be. And so if you can say, "Oh, do you know what tapping is?" They're like, "Oh yeah, I might have heard of that before." So, but but they're not sure if they're there for life coaching and I'm a combination of a life coach and a psychotherapist, and I'm also there as a massage therapist, and I'm just kind of there um, as an overall practitioner that comes in. I call it triage. I come in for triage situations. Um, so I try to give them a good sit down when they come in and tell them what to expect. It's only fair. And I try to let them know about the physical sensations and things like that ahead of time so that they're not caught off guard by that. And I have hoped that they've watched some of the videos on my website so that they're not caught off guard by that. So I just do the best I can when they come in. Um, yeah. And if not, we just have a dandy time figuring it out.
I bet I didn't know what to expect. I had no idea what EFT was, and I was working through some stuff at the time when I met Sarah, and I was just like, you know what? Why not? Let's just try it. And I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what was going to happen. I know that
That's
she
right.
had said, like, you might burp or you might sigh a lot or fart or whatever. And I was like, oh, this should be interesting. Yeah, it was definitely interesting, but I was really surprised like how good I felt after releasing that. Like I felt lighter.
Mhm.
that's interesting because
Mhm.
I'd had EFT too,
Yeah.
And I'm noticing that obviously different practitioners have their different methods, but there seems to also be a wide difference in skill and capability around this. So, Sarah, I haven't heard of any practitioners that are as skilled around it as you are, especially when it comes to like some of the past life stuff and like integrating the shadow and looking at some of that stuff. And it was so funny because when I described my experience to Allie, she was like, "What? That like what?" Because part of it is like the physical expression and like the yawning or the burping or the farting. And I went into my session and I didn't get any of that. Like there was like no physical response at all. Now I did experience like some emotional changes and like a little bit of mental
Mhm.
shift, but I wouldn't say that it was the
Mhm.
most profound experience. So Ali was like, wait a minute, like something isn't right here.
Mhm.
Um, so it's interesting to see that like your
Mhm.
experience and what you gain from it can really, really be different depending on the skill of the practitioner and what they're capable of doing. So I do want our audience to realize that when it comes to this type of work and really any healing work, that you really find someone who's skilled and knows what they're doing.
Yeah, and just because you go to school for something doesn't mean you're good at it. It means that you went to school for it. And yeah, and that's great. And I do want to say that cognitive shift in your experience of EFT, even though you didn't have those physical sensations and things like that, cognitive shift matters. Um, Cognitive shift matters. That's a good session. Where when you say, I walked into this session not knowing about this, but I've changed my mind. That's a good session. Um, never discount any tiny little shift can make a big change in the future, you know?
So Sarah, you've mentioned a lot the importance and the significance of like that cognitive shift, those cognitive changes. I'm really curious to know how EFT can help with like retraining the brain or like building and correcting neural connections that we developed from childhood or perhaps that were even developed from trauma that are mostly destructive to us and need to change.
Okay. So we're looking at um, a 12-second connection time in the intricate dance of our minds. There's a principle at play, and that's the one that is neurons that fire together wire together, and that takes about 12 seconds. And so, anytime an event occurs, right, neurons are wiring together, and that creates a symphony of other events occurring in the brain, and that's why we get addicted to certain behaviors. It's um, it's inviting, and it's inviting to keep those signals stimulated, and those neurons, as they continue to fire, invite other neurons in on the process, and they create neural bands. So they create stronger connections with each other until they eventually create neural networks. And those neural networks eventually create like a sense of identity of who we are. And all of this is a result of neuroplasticity, which is constantly going on in our brains. It happens from the time we're born to the time we die. So as an event occurs and we've got neuroplasticity going on, and eventually it's creating our reality, what we have to realize is that we're in charge of that each and every step of the way. what we think our reality is right now is just a result of our neurons firing that way for an extended period of time. So, what we want to do is for the things that no longer serve us, or for the habits that no longer serve us, or for the things that are stuck on repeat that are negative, we just want to interrupt that firing process and give those neurons a chance to go reconnect and do something else somewhere else.
So, for our audience, I want to clarify that neuroplasticity basically just means the brain's capacity to rewire or restructure its neural connections and change patterns of behavior. That's basically all that means.
That's all it really is. And it's from the time that we're born to the time that we die.
Yeah. And, I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of times when we're doing this type of healing work that we kind of lose sight of our brain's ability to heal itself and create healthier neural connections and change our patterns of behavior. I feel like we always focus on like that emotional piece and I'm hurt and there's trauma there and there's anger, there's pain and there's resentment without considering, hey, how is this stuff influencing how I act and how I perceive the world? How can I change that? So I'm so glad that this work brings that into consideration and includes that brain's capacity to rewire itself. I love that so much.
Well, it's a really beautiful time for us to be alive, to experience that, because honestly, the reason that we're here is because our brains do that, because our brains look for danger, because our brains ran from the tiger and fought hard and killed and all of the horrible, terrible things for survival that looked and sought for threat. That's the reason that we're alive on the planet today. And so our brains are literally wired to do that. That's what our ancestors passed down to us. And so we're lucky that we have a moment of respite in our society where we can say, hey, wait a minute, maybe our brains have more potential for that than that, you know? And maybe we can interrupt that process for higher and better thinking. Um, but yeah, we wouldn't be here if it weren't for our fear thinking. Um, and I'm grateful too that we have a chance to think about something new.
I'm really glad that you brought up that fear piece and how we're at the instinctual level wired to see danger and wired to be fearful because you're absolutely right that it's sort of an evolutionary trait that we carry from our ancestors. And overcoming that actually it requires a lot of deliberate effort. Like, you really have to almost change your perspective on just about everything you perceive in your life. And it does require support. So, that's another reason why we like having guests like you on, because we know that you're here to help people get to that place. And so, I'm glad you brought that up because that's a fantastic point.
It's not a birth defect. It's more like I like to say we're born with it, like the anxiety or the ancestral stuff, we're born with it. But I like to say it's more like the Grand Canyon, where it's been carved out by a lot of heavy use or deep ravines that have been carved out. But it's not an actual birth defect that we can't correct by carving out another path. And so, yeah, we can carve another pathway, but we're not actually defective.
I really appreciate you bringing that to our audience's attention too, because I feel like a lot of people today, especially right now, a lot of people are in defeatist energy. Like they just feel like nothing's ever going to change, or it can't change, it won't change, or they're too afraid to make those changes. Or it's like people are kind of settling into, well, I am who I am, and I am the way that I am. And like they kind of are coming into this form of acceptance in it. And I love how you can just say, like, even though we were born this way, that like change is a choice. Anyone can make changes. It's just we have to put in the work. And I understand people are exhausted. We're in burnout culture right now. But the underlying message to everyone is you can make changes. You just have to have the courage to take the first step.
Absolutely. Look, there's no such thing as not change. I like I like speaking in double negatives. There's always going to be change. Nature is changing and things are changing all around, and you can either embrace that or not, but things are going to change. And so let's do it together and let's do it with intention. The thing that makes good change happen is intention. And yeah, change is going to occur. So let's do
No,
it
I
with
love
intention.
that. So when we're in like the EFT session, like what other processes occur in the body while we're tapping?
Oh, well, you also have a bunch of chemical processes in your body that are going on, right? Because we are creatures of
Absolutely.
habit. And we were talking before, yeah, we were talking before about being stuck on repeat with our neurological processes and how inviting it is for us to have our neurons signaling. Our emotions are addicting, and they also have a chemical signature to them. And as we experience our emotions, the hypothalamus is up there secreting um, peptides, and the pituitary gland is up there releasing these peptides into the bloodstream. And as these things hit your cells, which have billions of receptors on it, um, they hit the cells receptors and they lock in new information to the cells, and they reprogram the cells all the way down to the DNA. And they tell that DNA of the cell to crave more of that specific kind of chemical. So that when the new cell divides, that new sister cell creates more receptors on it, craving that specific kind of chemical. So that new sister cell will have receptors on it for anger, craving anger, or craving joy, or craving jealousy, or craving fright, whatever chemical that you are experiencing the most frequently. So, our cells are designed to help us create our reality um, based on um, what we're addicted to. So, um, chemically, I'm walking down the street and I'm holding a cup of coffee in the same, there's a guy standing next to me and he's holding a cup of coffee, and we both step off the curb at the same time, and we both splash our coffee on ourselves. And one of us says, "Ah, I got coffee on me." And the other one says, "Oh, well, I got coffee on me." One of us is chemically addicted to disappointment, and one of us is not, if that makes sense to
It
you.
does. That was actually a very interesting analogy, and I was just thinking how freaking wild science and neuroscience is. Like, this is like a whole new realm. It's also very interesting, but it's just like, wow. We are very complex beings, people.
Very complex. And again, that's why I'm so glad that we kind of talked about neuroplasticity and our ability to reprogram our minds, because that's huge. And I think that
Yeah.
more people need to consider that that is something that's possible and that is something that you can do. Again, I just don't think that that's discussed a lot. And even with some of the other healing modalities, I really don't know if much consideration around that is even, considered. So I'm also a nerd, so I also find this all very
Hmm.
fascinating.
And see, what we're doing with EFT chemically and neurologically, it's like taking a syringe and we're using our words and we're using our intention and we're inserting other emotions into the mix and we're interrupting the signals and we're interrupting the emotional process and we're saying, I say this stronger. I say I intend this stronger. And it interrupts that process so that the neurons can do something else, but it also interrupts the chemical process. It inserts a new chemical into the process. So you've got a whole new chemical mix happening
Oh.
already so that you can start changing your chemical addiction.
So you're talking about, like, you say chemical addiction in the brain. So are you talking about neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine and those things that go up and down in our brain depending on if we're anxious or if we're happy or if we're looking for, like, some feel good stimulation? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, but I'm talking about, yeah, these types of hormones get released, but I'm talking that when you are dealing in the world of energy, you have very so you have very
Yeah.
subtle signatures. So there are very basic emotions. There's anger, there's happiness, there's sadness, but there's also wistfulness. There's glee. There's ecstaticness. There's different levels of
Hmm.
emotion going on. And so those are like, I would say, on a spectrum, right? On a spectrum of things. And so I guess what I'm getting at is that um, you can insert a frequency that's higher than a frequency that you are experiencing to interrupt something.
And then to insert that higher frequency, I mean, do you do it through the words or is it like the combination of the words and the tapping?
Um, Good question. So if I like to work in opposites a lot. And so if I'm doing shadow work or if I'm working in opposites, I say, I have this, and what do I want instead? Or I have this, and what's the opposite of that? That's what I'd like instead. And so I like to think in laws of opposites because oftentimes um, if I've got something, I don't even know what I want instead. I just know that I've got this lump of crud and I don't even know what to do with it. And I don't know how to interrupt it, but I need to start with something. So I'll just ask myself, what's the opposite thing of that? And I'll start interrupting the signal with the opposite thing of that. So if I have anger, I'll say, what do I want instead of anger? And I'll start interrupting the signal with that. Um, is any of that making sense?
Yeah, it is. It's basically through the words and the tapping. It's the combination of both through kind of, I guess, reverse psychology, it sounds like what you're doing. And through that, it's like you're interrupting like the neuron system and you're like reprogramming it at the same time.
Yes, you're flossing out. Yeah, yeah. But you're flossing out
Okay.
old beliefs and you're flossing out negative thinking, old beliefs, or stuff that's stuck in your nervous system, and you're replacing it with stuff that you
Ah,
want instead.
okay. That makes way more sense.
You know, you mentioned being addicted to emotions earlier, and I had a therapist say to me,
Uh huh.
and I honestly did not know this was a thing, that when you start working on, you know, reprogramming your minds and the way you think, you will notice that if, for example, you experience a lot of stress, that your body is almost like addicted to the stress response. And when you try to change, it's easy to slip back into the same patterns because your body's so addicted to it. And I honestly didn't know that was a
Yeah.
thing, and it kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, that's why tapping's so useful because, again, the hindbrain and the midbrain. So the hindbrain is, the midbrain is wired for emotion, but it's not wired for language. So some of the things that you experience in your body, you can't even really articulate or verbalize. It's just this weird feeling in the body, you know? And so that tapping, that rhythmic tapping, really helps soothe some of those things. And just like any habit, when you break a habit, your body wants to do something else instead. So you've got to ask yourself, what do I want now? You know, when you quit smoking, you've got a lot of time in your
Yeah.
day that you've got to find something new to do with,
That's
right?
actually very true. So how would a person go about how would you do EFT?
Oh, how would you do EFT? So it's super easy, everybody. You can learn it in 5 minutes. It's super easy. All you really do is you pick something that is stuck in your head, like a negative thought or a recent event or a traumatic event. Maybe it's an upcoming stress or an unwanted belief. Just pick something. And as you think about that thing, you might feel it in your body. You might feel a tightness in your chest or a lump in your throat or something come over you as you experience that um, um, recent event or traumatic event. And just start talking about it. And as you start talking about it, start tapping. And as you start tapping, you should start feeling that uncomfortable sensation in your body or that pent up energy around it. It should start dissipating. And you may experience some calming physical sensations, and you may start feeling a little bit more present. But in a nutshell, that's how you do EFT. It's not too difficult. There's some, tapping points that you can do, but there's not really a super wrong way to do EFT. Um, but basically, you're talking and you're tapping on yourself at the same time.
So, as Tiara had mentioned, and you had mentioned this too, I mean, obviously, just because you go to school for something doesn't mean that you are highly educated in it or highly skilled in it. And so, there's obviously different levels, and everyone has, their own unique spin. So, I guess my question to you is what should someone look for when they're searching for an EFT practitioner?
Connection.
What type of connection? But what type of connection?
Mm, just that you um, can they jump down a rabbit hole with you and you feel comfortable talking to them about some deep, dark, yucky stuff? Um, and um, can they hold space for you? Like holding space for somebody to do uncomfortable work is almost 9/10 of the law of being a good therapist across the board. Any kind of therapist across the board is the ability to hold space for somebody. So I would say that. I would say their training is not as important. The technique itself does wonders, and it can be used superficially, and it can be used in depth. And you can take the technique itself once you've learned it, if you know your own background and you've done counseling on your own self and you know where your stuff lies, you can do wonders on yourself with the technique, just working on your own. So don't be afraid to use it on your own.
So speaking of that, like I know that there's a lot of scripts that people can find online, and we pre-recording, like we had a sit down, just a chat, and we were talking about these scripts that people can find online. And to kind of give a quick recap, we were talking about the scripts, and although the scripts are very positive and affirmation like scripts, we were kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of, although affirmations is definitely a component of EFT, like there's a reason why these scripts don't necessarily work, maybe not at a level to really transform specific healing. And so how do we is it just like through education that people don't just go online and look for these scripts and find the tapping points and just working on themselves? Like, I mean, obviously that's very easy to do, and I know people who have gone and done that, but like what would you want to tell those people who are just like, well, I'm kind of limited on money, and if they just look up tapping points, which is you can find online, and then they find these very affirmational like scripts, like what message would you have for
Mm, 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 mm. I call BS on the affirmational scripts. I call BS on that. Um, Affirmational scripts are only okay. I call BS on
Indeed you
that.
did.
Um, Affirmations in EFT are good for after you've tapped out the negative. That's what EFT is for. You don't start EFT with affirmations. That's not what it's for. Affirmations are for reprogramming yourself after you've delved into work with your shadow self, your crap, your crud, your stuff that you don't want to face and that you don't want to look
Mm.
at. Okay? Any script is only so good insofar as it does what it does for you, as so far as it is your own truth. So use a script and then edit the script to be truth for you. How's
I've
that?
done that. Like I found some scripts and I've like edited them to be more in alignment with my truth. But I think I see what
Yeah.
you're saying because it seems to be, especially if you haven't tapped out some of the shadow, it seems to be more of like a surface level band-aid than really getting in there.
Then it's just an affirmation. It's not EFT, it's just
Right.
an affirmation.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, you can do an affirmation and tap on yourself. That's not EFT. That's called an
Right.
affirmation. Ah.
No, that is great because well, so like this is like the perfect segue into the next question. So like what makes a good EFT session?
A good EFT session is a nice deep dive into something that's uncomfortable and getting a little bit of work done and then some and then an up and out. So you should feel um, elevated and relaxed and motivated after an EFT session, even after doing some deep work. So landing on those affirmations is a great and good and positive thing, and we should do that. But we should start with the negative first. That's what it's there for.
Absolutely. Well, Sarah, I don't have any additional questions. Let's see if Tiara has any.
I do just have one. I'm curious. So, for people who might be interested in doing this kind of work, and these are people that are interested in,
Mhm.
you know, profound change and they want something better for their lives and for themselves, how many sessions would you recommend?
Depends on what kind of change you want. It depends on what kind of issue you have. To give EFT a good old college try, I would say somewhere between six and
Oh,
10 sessions is a super fair um, a super
okay.
fair go. Um, I wouldn't recommend under 3.
Very interesting.
Um, mhm,
Okay.
mhm. But if you want some deep life changes, I would give it a go for several sessions.
Okay. And that makes a lot of sense because even with some of the other modalities that we are familiar with, oftentimes it does take multiple sessions. And again, it just depends on what's there and what you're working through.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, exactly. Like if you're looking for some real life changes and life coachy stuff and things like that, I would say a good 10 sessions ought to help get you somewhere. Um, yeah. And so, other than that, though, if you're just looking for like a phobia or something like that, I've had some beautiful, we like to call them 1 minute miracles, where we just have some beautiful sessions where they're just one-offs. Um, there's no hard rule about it. There's no hard rule about it. One-off sessions can work wonders for people.
So, for anyone who's interested in learning more about you, Sarah, and your service offerings, where can they go?
Oh, they can go to emotionalfreedom.me online. I book uh, online sessions for EFT, and yeah, that's available.
Great. And you said that you have videos on your website?
I have videos, yes, and I think I've got a little EFT map somewhere posted that you can see the tapping points. And yeah, I've got some information up there that people can check out. I do have a YouTube channel, and I think you can just find links to it through my website, but it's also emotionalfreedom.me.
Okay. And for our audience, we'll also make sure that all of Sarah's information is in the show notes. So you'll have direct links.
Yes,
Thank
of
you.
course. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. We are actually going to wrap up this session, but we are going to do a tapping session with Sarah that we will be posting kind of as bonus clips. And, you guys can see firsthand Sarah's work, and that will be posted throughout social media and on websites, and we'll tell you where to find it.
All right. Thank you so much, Sarah. And I'm looking forward to doing this EFT session because I'm so, so curious about your methods. And, I love finding new, unique healing modalities, and I'm so intrigued by this. So we will post it as a bonus, and you'll also be able to find it wherever you listen to podcasts. But as Ali mentioned, we'll make sure that it gets out there.
Thank you, everyone, and have a great week.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Take care, you guys.